On the night of the 23rd and 24th of March 1945, the British Second Army crossed the River Rhine in Germany. By the 25th, a firm bridgehead had been secured into which additional troops and equipment were pouring into to begin the breakout into the north of the country. Among them was the 11th Armoured Division, which had moved up from its rest area in Belgium and was assembled in the Rhine bridgehead by the 29th of March. That same day, the 11th Armoured commenced its part in the breakout, but soon found that it wasn't to be the swift advance most had anticipated, as the divisional history records. By midday on the 30th, it was clear that our advance in Germany would be no procession, and that however irresistibly we might sweep forward, we should usually have to clear up as we went. The delay imposed upon us by the indifferent quality of the roads and the number of obstacles made local recovery and defence feasible for the enemy, while the impossibility of manoeuvre by tanks off those roads put a most effective check on armoured action. Despite these difficulties, the 11th Armoured had by the 10th of April 1945 advanced 240 kilometres into northern Germany and were standing on the banks of the River Aller near the town of Essel. That night, the 1st Commander Brigade, which was temporarily attached to the division, conducted an assault crossing of the river and established a small bridgehead on the other side. To reinforce the commandos, the 4th Battalion, the King's Shropshire Light Infantry, were ferried across the Aller in the evening of the 11th of April, followed the next morning by the arrival of A Squadron, the 3rd Royal Tank Regiment. The arrival of these two units enabled the British to begin expanding the bridgehead, with the commandos striking west towards Hedemstorf, whilst the Shropshires and A Squadron advanced to the north. The Shropshire's Battalion History notes: at 1300 hours on the 12th of April, orders were received to clear the high wooded ground to the right of the main road in order to expand the bridgehead. A&D companies, with a platoon of C, went into action at 1400 hours. Supporting the infantry were the Comet tanks of No. 1 Troop, A Squadron, the 3rd Royal Tank Regiment, which was under the command of Lieutenant John Langdon. No. 1 Troop were required to clear the centre line with 2 companies of infantry, the going being very slow as there were thick woods on either side of the road. We, the tanks, remained on the road while the infantry worked through the woods. By the late afternoon, after overcoming German resistance, the objectives had been secured and the British troops were consolidating their gains, when suddenly, at 1700, a German Tiger tank, callsign F01, began to roll down the road directly towards the British positions. Lieutenant John Langdon recalls: I had given orders for a brew, which the crew started to get ready while I remained in the turret. I then heard the terrifying sound of an AP shot which whistled past me. I shouted to the crew, who scrambled back into the tank, and to my consternation, saw through my binoculars an enemy tank slowly moving through the trees. Immediately, Lieutenant Langdon's Comet returned fire with an armour-piercing round, which proved ineffective in piercing the Tiger's frontal armour. Lieutenant Langdon continues: I saw its gun, an 88mm, slowly traversing towards us. I gave Trooper Charlton, my driver, the order to reverse. The tank we had encountered was a Tiger. Head-on as it was to us, we could not hope to knock it out. We were outgunned, and if I wanted to save my tank and crew, this was the only thing to be done. As the lieutenant's tank reversed into the woods, the Tiger engaged and destroyed an armoured car belonging to the Shropshires, before turning onto one of the other Comets, which was likewise attempting to back itself up into the woods. However, before it could do so, the Tiger fired a shot, striking the British tank in the side, prompting the crew to bail out and get to safety. Moments after, a further 2 shots finished off the Comet. Following this, the German tank withdrew and disappeared into the fog of war, with Lieutenant Langdon remarking: I got on the air, made my report, and had the dubious pleasure of hearing someone back at regimental headquarters, saying that reports of Tigers had come in before and were generally unfounded. I told him quickly what I thought of this and rang off. Seeing that Tiger coming down the road was the worst moment I'd ever experienced. The next morning, on the 13th, the bulk of A Squadron, the 3rd Royal Tank Regiment, was ordered to assist the 4th King Shropshire Light Infantry in breaking through the woods, and it was as they were preparing to resume their advance at 0730 that Tiger F-01 reappeared on the road. Although engaged by men of the 4th Battalion, the Tiger knocked out 2 6-pounder anti-tank guns and a nearby vehicle, prior to withdrawing a little up the road as it became the focus of British artillery. Meanwhile, news had reached the headquarters of the 3rd Royal Tank Regiment about the enemy tank, and subsequently orders were issued for C Squadron, who had crossed the River Aller that morning, to move around and attempt to break through on the right flank. Setting off at around 0930, C Squadron passed through the positions of the 1st Battalion, the Cheshire Regiment, near Enghausen, and headed north into the woods. At the head of the column was a Comet tank commanded by a Sergeant Hardin, who led the squadron through the woods and onto a dirt track that ran westwards to the main road. Advancing cautiously along this track, Sergeant Hardin was on high alert for any German troops, when directly to his front, about 100 metres away, the sergeant got eyes on Tiger F-01, which was in a static position on the main road, looking down towards A Squadron and the 4th Shropshires. Coming to a sudden halt, the Comet tank fired an armour-piercing round into the exposed left-hand side of the Tiger, which began slowly traversing its turret towards Sergeant Hardin's tank. As it was doing so, a second AP round was loaded into the breech of the Comet's 77mm main gun and fired at the Tiger, resulting in a fire breaking out inside F-01 and effectively knocking out the tank. From inside his turret, Sergeant Hardin observed the Tiger's crew of 5, a couple of whom had suffered minor burns from the fire, scrambling out and running to safety, before he informed Squadron Headquarters that the Tiger had been dealt with. The war diary for the 3rd Royal Tank Regiment records: at 10:30, C Squadron blew up 1 Tiger, 3 other tanks reported on centre line, Hawker Typhoon fighter bombers requested, Typhoons claimed to have knocked out 2 88mm and 1 half-track. Advance continues, but country very wooded on either side of centre line and visibility very poor due to burning of undergrowth. Considerable number of enemy infantry in this area. By the evening of the 13th of April 1945, the 4th Battalion, the King Shropshire Light Infantry, with support from the 3rd Royal Tank Regiment, had advanced through and cleared the woods up to its northern limits. For the men of the 11th Armoured Division, many of whom had passed the wreck of Tiger F-01, it served as a reminder that, although victory in Europe was imminent, there still remained tough fights ahead in the coming days and weeks against an enemy who is fighting to defend every inch of their homeland.